Welcome into a special edition, sort of a reaction show. I feel like I've been doing a lot of these lately. This time on the basketball side, that's Sherrell McMillan. I'm Tommy Ashley. We're sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt. Sherrell, Drake Powell has officially declared for the NBA draft. Just your overall thoughts upon getting this news this afternoon.
You said you've been doing a lot of reaction shows. There's been a lot to react to over the last couple of weeks on both sides. I can't remember a more active time. I'm probably famous last words for UNC football and basketball. It's just been crazy last couple of weeks. For Drake, the announcement of itself, I don't think really should have surprised anyone. He was highly touted coming out of high school, made a rapid jump from his junior year to his senior year in high school and went from like a top 50 prospect to a top 10 prospect. I think he settled somewhere in the top 15. But when you have that kind of profile, the NBA is going to be looking at you and they're going to be looking at you hard, especially when you perform well in some of these skills camps that they have over the summer. A big thing for him last summer, not quite 10 months ago, was the CP3 Elite Camp, which is basically Chris Paul gets together a lot of the Nike AAU kids and then a lot of the Nike sponsored college kids, let's put it that way. And they go to a camp and they have a lot of pros there. And it's just instruction and basketball and skill work and all that stuff. And he performed really, really well. And they're scouts at that event. And I think that was the first time he really, really jumped on NBA radars. And the big question on him coming into the season was like, can he shoot? That was really it. I mean, people knew that he wasn't going to be the guy who's going to score 30 points in a game or take over down the stretch. That's just not how he plays or how he operates. But it was, if he's going to be a 3-and-D wing, which is, again, all the rage in the NBA, can he defend at a high level and can he make threes when he's wide open? And he answered the question pretty emphatically, I would say, on making threes, wide open. He didn't create anything for himself, but when he got a pass and had an open look, he made it almost 38% of the time, which is better than most of the roster, even if on limited attempts. So he answered that question. And then from a defensive standpoint, I mean, I think he's a known quantity. He might not have some of the counting stats or even some of the advanced stuff, but his defense definitely passes the eye test just with his length and his athleticism. I mean, this season, Tommy, he guarded everyone. Yeah, he was on Cooper Flag for a bit, and I thought did a really good job on him in that first game, that last game in the Smith Center. And Drake getting a couple fouls on him was really one of the reasons the game turned towards the end. So he did a decent job on Cooper Flag, who everybody did, number one pick, National Player of the Year, All-American, all that good stuff. But then at the same time, when UNC needed somebody to stop Marcus Burton, who is 5'11", and a quick, shifty guard, who did they put on him? They put Drake Powell on him. So that shows his defensive versatility. And, when you have that kind of range and you've shown that you can make a shot and you performed well in front of scouts, then there's going to be NBA attention. And I think that's what brought us to him, declaring for the draft today.
Yeah, like you said, I don't think a lot of surprise here. Drake going, obviously, sort of that dichotomy where Carolina fans want to see guys develop and become a part of a program and stick around and become fan favorites and all that, but they also want guys to be able to have enough success to go pro. To your point, Sherrell, and I want you to talk about this a little more, his intangibles and also his measurables, I mean, his length, his athleticism, and you talked about that 3-and-D aspect of it. I mean, there's guys in the pros that make a lot of money, and all they do is shoot threes and play defense. Seems like that's what the potential is for Drake Powell. Do you think, maybe not this day and age, and I didn't ask you this question beforehand, but maybe 10 years ago, do you think, or 15 years ago, you followed the NBA forever, that Drake's profile would have fit then, or is it just the nature of the new game in the NBA?
That's a good question. I think
I don't
there's
know
an
that it
emphasis.
matters. Yeah, I don't know
Yeah,
that the question matters, but it's an interesting one for old head.
yeah. I mean, there's an emphasis definitely that wasn't there before on guys who specialize in those two things because everything's about pace and space and being able to get looks and are you versatile enough to play multiple positions. Before there was a lot of specialization, and I think with guys who we would call 3-and-D, yeah, those are two things that they specialize in, but most of those guys are versatile enough that they can do other things. It's just that that's what is needed so that the players who are, at the top of the food chain, so they have room to operate and kind of do their thing. So I would say probably a little bit, yeah, because um, you said potential with Drake before, and so I'm gonna change my answer. This live radio, I'm gonna change my answer. I still think he would have gone pro 10 or 15 years ago because the NBA, more than any other league, I would say, drafts on traits and drafts on potential. Even still, it's kind of balanced a little bit, whereas before it was all potential. Now you'll get some guys who can come in like a Zach Edey and get picked in the first round and be productive right away, who are older, but it's still a lot of potential. And Drake, that's one thing that every single person who watches him play, I've said it for the last 2 years, like when you see him on the court, the potential just kind of oozes off of him. Like you just see it dripping off of him as he runs up and down the court, because there's so much more there as far as him as a basketball player that hasn't been tapped into yet. And if I was a general manager, especially someone who is of repute and who is very secure in their job, I would definitely take a flyer on Drake just because he's moldable. He's still developing as a player. And if you are able to get him and fine tune some things, you really probably found not even a diamond in the rough, but you found a guy who can do a lot of things and really help your team. And, as far as the NBA stuff, we've heard of at least two teams. One is still playing, one is not, who have done a lot of work on him over the course of the season and looking at his abilities and, just finding out more about him on background. So there are teams who he's high on the radar and very interested. Whether or not that equates to a first round selection, we still don't know, but I would be surprised just because in addition to the basketball stuff, he's just like a really good person. And I think that still means something when you're drafting, especially probably outside of the lottery. You want someone who's a fit. So there's that aspect of it as well. He's a good person, and his basketball IQ is off the charts too. So there's a lot of stuff to like about Drake Powell, and that's probably why he's going into the draft, because he's heard that feedback, and his agents have heard that feedback from teams.
Yeah, you sort of stole my question there. My next question was why now? I mean, in NIL era, you can come back to school, make a lot of money, but to your point, he's gotten some good feedback in the league. But I still ask it because I have it on my list: is why now for him? Is it because of that?
It's because of that. You never know what particular team you're on is going to look like the next year, what your role might be, what's your role, if it's going to change, if you're going to be asked to do something that maybe you aren't ready to do or can't do, or in some cases aren't willing to do. I'm not talking about Drake in general, but just overall. There's always injuries to think about. And then most people, the goal is to, I think of the famous line from John Henson, the goal isn't to get to the NBA, it's to stay in the NBA. And I think a lot of guys feel like if they were to go to the NBA and maybe they get sent down to the G League, or maybe they're with the team but they're not playing much, at least basketball is their job. It's not as sexy or anything as maybe playing at Carolina and being the guy on campus and all that stuff, but you have 100% of your time to devote to your craft, to becoming better, to becoming a true NBA player. So I think that's some appeal for a lot of folks as well. And even though I don't say NIL, even though player salaries are exploding, it's still, I don't think you can make as much if you're staying in college as you would over the course of multiple years if you're a first round pick. Now, I haven't done the math. I know people are going to go check the math and do all that, but just anecdotally, I'll say.
Well, to your point, it's 100% basketball all the time. So you're going to get the maximum development, let's put it that way, when you're in that realm in the NBA. And we're talking with Sherrell McMillan here. North Carolina's Drake Powell declares for the NBA. Seems like, one guy from Pittsburgh leaves, another one's coming. What a crazy time in college sports. But Sherrell, that leads me to my bigger question here for North Carolina fans is, what now for North Carolina? Not unexpected. You and Joey and Sean have talked about North Carolina sort of operating with the thought that he was going to go. But what now for a Carolina team? Roster management, building a roster, still actively a thing here, late April. So we're not near your Father's Day thing, And last time we talked, you said, I believe you said September or late August for roster. So what's going on in Chapel Hill when you're trying to build a roster these days?
Yeah, I'm just at the point now with how things are going that it should be back in the olden days where you just look at the roster when the team releases it before practice to figure out who's on there. And I'm slightly exaggerating, but not not to a crazy extent because there's going to be movement in May and June and July and probably August. Guys are going to want out of their deals because they're going to want more money, or they're going to decommit, or somebody is going to reclassify, or somebody's going to get fired and go to a different job. There's always going to be player movement, and it's more 365, I think, than it's ever been. It kind of used to be once the season was over, you got through the NBA stuff, you got to the deadline, it was dead over the summer. But that's just not the case anymore with the portal in the way that player movement is no longer really restricted. So there will still be players around, I think, for UNC, but I would say, people don't like it, but we've said multiple times that their major portal work is done, and it's like, well, what does that exactly mean? And what it means to me is that there are three scenarios right now happening in Chapel Hill. The Van Allen Lubin thing was kind of the surprise, I would say, uh, because that just wasn't expected. Before maybe a week ago, I would say, from the coaching staff and people we talked to around UNC. But everything else, they feel like they have planned for. Now, you can disagree with the plan or say that the plan is not adequate, but I think in their minds, there are three scenarios at play. So one is Drake, enters the draft. He's not coming back. You have to move on. So I think that's part one. You have to move on. He's done. Maybe there's somebody else out there that you like. Scenario two is that Drake isn't 100% in, and he goes to workouts and decides, you know what, maybe I need to come back. Well, if that happens, then there's your small forward. Scenario three, which I think is gaining momentum or has gained momentum, is that Drake leaves and that UNC feels, this is not me saying this, that UNC feels it has at least covered its bases with Jaron Stevenson potentially playing some three, and with Jonathan Powell potentially playing some three, and with Caleb Wilson potentially playing some three. So think of it as a team who, a football team, the NFL draft is coming up. Think of it as a team who in free agency covered all of their kind of, in their mind, covered kind of their big deficiencies. And they're going to use the draft to kind of pick the best player available. Carolina feels like it's covered its bases, its needs, and now it's just a matter of whether there's someone who's the desired role and the desired salary match what UNC is looking for. So try to word that very carefully because I know people, hang on some things sometimes, but I think those are the three scenarios at play. In my mind, with the way Drake worded his statement, he said he's 100% in, even though, we did confirm that he's maintaining his college eligibility. You just have to operate. And I think they feel like they've operated as if he's not coming back. And so if that happens, then you take number two off the table. So it's either, do they feel like there's someone out there who they have the salary for and who will accept the role that they're asking, or do they, go with option three, which is the in-house options of Caleb Wilson, Jaron Stevenson, Jonathan Powell, a combination of the three. Those are the scenarios I think at play.
It is, I'm old, not that old. So anybody that's older than me, don't send me notes. It is just crazy how it works. Last question for you, Sherrell, before we get out of here. And you've pretty much covered all the bases, but I wanted to ask, the question is, and you don't have to do it specifically for Drake Powell, though obviously we were talking about it. How do you deal with scenario two? If you're a coach, if you're a program trying to build a roster that's complete, that it all fits together, how do these teams deal with guys that get in the draft and then maybe decide at the last minute they don't want to be in the draft? It seems complicated for me, especially with salaries and all that stuff.
Yeah, very complicated because, I don't want to say anything we The assumption is because Drake isn't going in, because Drake has entered the draft, that there is a cache of money that has opened up. With Vidal Lubin, that was true. With Powell, I don't want to say yes or no because we can't confirm that. We think that, but we haven't been able to confirm it. So it's tough. And I think all it is about is communication. You have to be talking to the agent. You have to be talking to the player. You have to be talking to the family and just say, keep me updated. What are you thinking? And at some point, I don't know when the line is or when the date is, but at some point, the staff, Jim Tanner, UNC, those folks, they have to say, okay, we waited until April 28th. We waited until April 28th, and the feeling is that he's going to do this particular thing, so going to move in the other direction, or the feeling is that he's coming back, so we're going to hang tight. But you kind of have to use your intel, be able to glean, talking to people all around, and communication all in concert to be able to figure out what the next move is. And I think, I think Powell is he's kind of telegraphed what he hopes to do through his statement and how he said that, he's 100% in. Again, that's what folks need to say because they won't be taken seriously if they don't say they're 100% in. As an aside, I talked to someone close to another player who's kind of in the same situation of entering the draft, but also this person has entered the transfer portal. Powell didn't do that, but they're like, yeah, they haven't. This person hasn't talked about schools, hasn't talked about anything. They're 100% focused on the draft. And I think there are people like that. So it's just tough because there's so many things happening, but you have to use your communication, your information from talking to so many of these folks and making it the best informed decision you can. It's a gamble for sure. But the thing with Powell is that, he didn't enter the portal. So at least his options are narrowed down to UNC or the NBA.
Crazy world of college athletics. But Drake Powell makes a decision that's best for him. Announces for the NBA draft. Sherrell McMillan, go ahead. Always got more.
No, I just think it's interesting to me, the reaction, because people always say they want one and dones until the one and dones are one and done. It's like, well, this is what you wanted. When you recruit top talent, you're going to lose them, and you have to account for that they're going to leave. Now, I think the disappointing thing for UNC, if you look back at what the 2024 class once was, it was Elliot Cadeau, James Brown, Drake Powell, and Ian Jackson. And there's a good chance that James Brown's the only one left. So out of that foursome, they would have gotten 5 combined years, 6 if you count Brown's next year. And I think that's hard for a fan base who they crave the talent that some of the other schools have, but I would say just as much as the other fan bases, especially like Kentucky, they also like growing with players and seeing, guys come in at 18, leave at 22 as completely different players. And maybe that's not a reality anymore. Maybe you just can't do that. But I think for the Carolina fan base, that's tough because there's such reverence for the culture and how things have always been done there. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I just think that's why it's particularly tough for this fan base because Drake Powell's one of those guys who, had he stayed, if he came out in 1993 or 1992, he probably stays at least 3 years, I would imagine. And he becomes like a Carolina legend because he probably would have been on some good teams and, made some big shots or made some big plays. But the reality is now, when you are the level of player he is, more often than not, you leave after 1 year. And I still think, even though the fan base says they want one and dones, I still think that's tough for them to kind of get their head around.
It's kind of like on the football side. People wanted a completely change away from the Mac Brown era. They got it. And now dealing with it has been a thing. Imagine this. Imagine a day and age, Sherrell, where Michael Jordan stayed 3 years. James Worthy stayed 3 years. Sam Perkins stayed 4.
Vince Carter, 3 years. Antoine Jameson, 3 years. Tyler Hansbrough, 4 years. It's a different world, and I don't know if we'll ever get back to that point. If we do, it'll be probably with less talented players because there'll be some kind of side development academy league something. But yeah, it's fascinating the change that's happened. Really, people say 5 years, but for me, it's been the last 2 really where you can see the huge change. I mean, 2 years ago with Cormac Ryan and Harrison Ingram, there was talk of NIL, but at that point it was still kind of like true NIL. It was Ingram's going to do some commercials for Red Bull, or he's going to have the Cormac Ryan summer camp at so and so place. It was that kind of stuff. And I think last year was when, to me, I noticed it became fully professional, in that there were agents, there were term sheets, there was negotiations, there was pre-discussion via back channels. All these things that you just wouldn't associate with collegiate sports, to me, showed up last year. They've been legal, for 4 years now, but last year was really when I felt there was a sea change with how business is just done in college sports. And that cat's out of the bag. It's over now. It's just a matter of what the next iteration looks like. But I don't think we'll ever go back to something more quaint. And I don't think necessarily the players should be compensated, in my opinion. But there's no other league, professional or otherwise, where every player is a free agent every year, and the contracts appear to be not really real or not really enforceable. So there's no guardrails. There's nothing. So I think most reasonable people would say, yeah, the players deserve to be paid. They're part of this huge enterprise. They've been exploited for a long time. But instead of finding kind of a neutral ground, they went from one side of the aisle completely to the other side without any guardrails. And now it's just pure chaos.
That sums it up. I'm going to let it ride. Pure chaos. But good for Drake Powell. One and done at North Carolina. Gets his opportunity to go to the league. Sherrell McMillan's been all over this. Coast to coast guys have been all over it. Sean, Joey. I'm Tommy Ashley, sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt. Check them out on Franklin Street or online at johnnytshirt.com. Stay tuned to Inside Carolina, because goodness me, when we printed the shirts that said there is no offseason, we had no idea how right that would be. Sherrell, appreciate it.